Most people misunderstand the sequence of satisfaction in life. They view something like generosity as an output to get to at some point in the future. But in the meantime, I've got things I need to do to build to that. So I can afford to be generous when I'm successful. What people don't realize is successful people are generous. If you lead with the generosity, opportunity happens.
Like millions of people around the world, we need to work. Some do it for the money, others do it for the recognition. And if you're lucky, you do it because you love it. But finding purpose and passion in your work can be easier said than done, and the path to success can be unpredictable at best. But if you're looking for some inspiration, then I've got one question for you. Are you consuming your career, or is it consuming you? Welcome to Consuming Careers. Have you ever heard of the paradox of generosity? Well, it goes something like this. The more you give, the better off you are. But so very few people are especially generous. And why is that? Well, hey friends, it's Bruce Smith. And this week on Consuming Careers, we're meeting with Chris Gabriel, who discovered his purpose and his passion, as well as his training, has equipped him to not only be generous, but to build a framework to help others, if done wisely and well, to be generous in ways that can make a transformational impact on the giver, the receiver, society, and the world. And you'll also hear that a significant inspiration for Chris's generosity journey is City of Refuge in Atlanta. It's a faith-based environment that helps individuals and families transition out of crisis. And that's where we catch up with Chris over breakfast. Well, welcome back to Consuming Careers Podcast, and this is going to be an interesting interview today. We've just spent about an hour touring the grounds of City of Refuge, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But my guest is Chris Gabriel. Chris, welcome to Consuming Careers.
Thank you so much, Bruce.
So for the last hour, we've been kind of roaming the grounds of City of Refuge, which is just an amazing story. And it's going to take me a few days to absorb everything we've talked about. But before we get to that, if you don't mind, if you could just give us 30 to 60 seconds of who are you, what are you doing now, and we'll just start there.
That sounds great. Well, thank you again. It's a pleasure to be here. As you know, I have a day job running a wealth management practice for a national wealth management firm. We focus on giving. So our specialty is working with families for whom giving is a priority, not the only thing they care about, but something that's important to them. We also represent the other side of the coin. We work with nonprofit organizations, helping them be good stewards of resources and also raise more money.
Right.
Outside of that, I'm the founder and president of Wise Generosity, which is a book and a platform to encourage and support more and better giving in the world. And so those are two different hats.
Well, that's how we got connected.
It is.
But that's not what we experienced for the last hour. So you also serve on the board of a few nonprofits, including City of Refuge. And I'd heard about City of Refuge several years ago, not when it turned into the size it is today. And I think it was probably 10 years ago that I first heard about it. But you've been here for about 20. Can you, if you can, give kind of an overview of City of Refuge, its purpose, and kind of what we're doing now? Because we're sitting in the Innovation Center of City of Refuge. Tell us a little bit about City of Refuge.
Yeah, so City of Refuge is an organization that recognizes the fact that there are people in crisis in our community, crisis mentally, crisis physically, crisis financially, crisis spiritually, and the solutions to those predicaments are complicated and involve a lot of love, help, and support. And so our motto is light, hope, and transformation. And so whatever age and stage of life you're in, if you've been in difficult circumstances, we want to offer you an outlet. And so we have a school and a medical clinic and a program to transition from homelessness to sustainability. We're in the Innovation Hub, which is a vocational training center.
Yeah, this place is amazing.
And we do all kinds of different training, from cybersecurity to culinary arts and auto mechanic. And it's all here in one place, and that's really part of what makes this special, is wherever you are and wherever you're coming from, if you've got an acute need, we can help you address it.
And we're in what would be known as West Atlanta.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I think we said, and I read about this earlier, that it's the most dangerous zip code in Metro Atlanta.
Yeah, the 30314 zip code where we are now, by any statistical measure, is the most challenging in Atlanta. And one of the most in the country, all the rates about poverty and incarceration, et cetera. And so part of what City of Refuge has done is establish itself here in the center of need in our community. We're on our 8-acre campus. That's 210,000 square feet of space, which has been built out piece by piece to address all these different needs in one place. I guess part of what leads to real transformation is having what you need and the people who can help you all in one spot rather than having to try to wander around and find everything.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier about, think of the case of a single mom with 3 or 4 kids, right? 2 kids, 1 kid, and trying to get those services that might be a car drive away when they don't have a car, and getting on a bus or however, those logistics are almost impossible when you're trying to keep a job and care for a child or 2 or 3, and then get around to those services that are meant for good, but you just can't get to them. So that whole concept of putting it all in one place is amazing. How many people can you house here?
We have between 200 and 300 residents on campus. We've got some additional residences in the area immediately around us, and we're building more all the time. Affordable housing and transitional programs from one state to another are a big part of what we do here. Again, light, hope, and transformation. So another population we serve are returning citizens, folks coming out of prison who want to be building a new life for themselves. And again, face just a lot of barriers to that. So we give them a place to live and all the different services and resources they need to make their way in that new and better life.
Well, to say this place is amazing is certainly an understatement. And to try to describe it in 5 minutes does it a disservice. So I'll definitely put a link to City of Refuge in the show notes, but easy to find on the web.
It is indeed, and all this is the vision and execution of our fearless leader, Pastor Bruce Deal, who's been at this for more than 25 years, and is certainly one of my personal inspirations. And as we're talking about that, I think we'll probably circle back to this story in some respect because it's a big part of who I am today. Was forged here. Yeah.
So we got connected on the topic of generosity, and the fact that you're even involved with this for the last 20 years speaks to your personal desire or your personal heart for generosity, right? So, but that isn't necessarily how it all started.
Right.
So, I want to hear a little bit, if you could, just backdrop of where you grew up. How did you get into financial advising? Because you've done a couple of things along the way. How you got to Atlanta, and then this whole idea of generosity, like, where did that come from? Like, why do you even care?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's, in the introduction to the book, Wise Generosity, give a little bit of that personal story. Because I think the reader asked that question, well, where did this book come from and why should I be interested in it? And while the book's not at all about me, it is an outgrowth of my personal story, which is not remarkable in any particular way, and I don't consider myself to be a great example of generosity, but what I have realized is I've been surrounded by generosity my whole life, generous people, and they've shaped me into who I am. So I grew up in a small town in the Hudson Valley area of New York, great place to be a kid. Went off to college, had the blessing of a great education. Like most folks, I didn't know what I wanted to do exactly. Ended up with different majors and different career options, and there were a lot of different vocations that either rejected me or that I rejected through the years.
Whatever you think it is, it's wrong.
It's wrong. And that's certainly great advice for any young person out there is, whatever you think you want to do when you're 18, think again.
Just know that's not it.
That is, occasionally it is, but most often not. But I found myself in Washington, D.C., after graduate school, thinking I was going to do a certain kind of job. I had been trained in foreign policy. I have a graduate degree in international relations, but the Cold War had just ended. No one cared about foreign policy anymore, and there weren't any jobs. Of course, that was then. This is now. I have lots of work these days.
That's right.
But I ended up in nonprofit fundraising, kind of a little bit of a circuitous story, working for an organization in D.C., and I really liked that work. But I met my lovely lovely wife there. She was from Asheville, North Carolina, and wanted to live closer to home. She announced as we were getting more serious about our relationship that she was moving south. I was welcome to come along, otherwise it was nice knowing me. And that brought us here to Atlanta. That was a crossroads in life. Didn't know exactly what to do at that point. I was a bit of a fish out of water in a new place.
Yep.
The work I had been doing didn't really exist here, and so ended up somewhat by accident in financial advisory, in the financial advisory profession. Had a good friend from college and my DC roommate who had gone into this industry, and he encouraged me to do it. And I thought to myself, I'm not really sure this is for me, but I'll give it a try.
Like, what was the rationale? You can make good money.
It wasn't that so much, actually.
Okay.
And that's a great question because I did want a career that was sustainable and that would enable me to raise a family. And I realized that was probably going to be in the for-profit sector doing something, but I didn't know what.
Okay.
Investment banking, management consulting, lots of different things that I had looked at. Wealth management was not on the list at all. But what he understood about me and about the job is that it has two very important elements. The first is that the functional side of it is engaging and demanding and ever-changing. And this capital markets are highly dynamic. And so there's a lot to challenge and engage the brain. I'm a little bit ambidextrous, and so that is all kind of left brain activity, which I enjoyed. But the rest of it is very relational. Mm-hmm. It's about people and engaging with people and really getting to know them in meaningful ways and helping them. And there was always an impulse to help people that was underlying a lot of the work that I had hoped to do in one form or fashion, which sort of segues into some of the generosity motivation. But he was right about all of that. I mean, that was 25 years ago, and it turns out both elements of that work were both relevant and meaningful to me.
But you got fairly purposeful in the area of generosity. So how did that come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's a part of the introduction to the book. It's a spiritual journey in there as well. I came to faith as an adult after we moved here. I never read the Bible, and that was a transformative event in my life, as you would imagine. And as I was reflecting on that and sort of who I was and what I was supposed to be when I grew up, and I was in my 30s at that point, so there was still a lot of work to be done. I came to appreciate that there were really four pillars that my life rested on. There was a spiritual component. There was a faith and family component. I mean, a friends and family component. Mm-hmm. There was a professional component. And then there was a service component. And the service component had always been there, just realized that I had been blessed with many gifts and opportunities and just always had this sense inside that those aren't just for my benefit. They're to benefit other people. And what can I be doing given the advantages and opportunities that I've had to help other people, to remove the barriers that were keeping other people from those same opportunities and advantages. So in reflecting now, a lot of the work that I do as a volunteer is around those circumstances, removing barriers to opportunity and providing chances for people to achieve their potential.
Well, just asking the question about what matters. Right. I don't think I asked that. I don't think I asked that question until I was in my 30s. Like, am I doing anything that matters, or should I be doing anything that matters? You spend men mostly spend a lot of their time on the early years just absorbing whatever they can.
That's right.
Take and so.
I'm a guy at that point with a job, a business that I'm trying to grow. Essentially self-employed. I've got young kids. There's a lot going on, and you're trying to make sense out of all of it. But just with that, it's not just the practical, sort of insular, self-contained world. Realizing that there's a world beyond that I was also intersecting with, and that mattered as well. Yeah,
and like the whole idea of generosity just seemed at that time like a bolt-on. Mm-hmm. Like, I'll get to it if I have time, capacity, and kind of how do I check that box quick and easy so I can get back to, what I think that matters.
What I think matters. And I think that's the subtitle of the book is A Guide to Purposeful and Productive Living and Giving. And all of us have a purpose in life, whether we realize it or not, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And consciously knowing what your purpose is a huge part of having an effective, meaningful, and rewarding life. And there's so much unhappiness and so much distress in our life, I think much of it boils down to that. And so, again, having the advantage of a great, broad liberal arts education, I realized relatively recently that my real calling was as a philosopher, financial advisor, which is a career path which I've created, and is probably the only person who would want to do that, and maybe the only person who is doing it. Those sense of underlying call to meaning, it really matters. And generosity is a big component of that, because there's a lot of science and philosophy and spiritual teaching to back this up. We become what we do in a very real way. And so there's a line in the Bible, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, teaches Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. And I always viewed that teaching at its surface level as observational. And that's just wisdom, right? You could get that same sense from philosophy or even from science. What you're observing empirically as a scientist, you're getting a sense of the state of that particular object or item, whatever it is. So if I look at you or me, and I look at you look at your checkbook and you look at your calendar, you can tell a lot about you.
That's right.
And so evaluating those things gives you a sense of who you are at that point. But what I think Jesus was saying is something more profound, much more profound than that, which is you become what you're doing. And some of that is a conscious effort on your part to say, who do I want to be? And what do I need to do to become more that way? And your heart then follows your treasure in the sense. So if you're being generous with your time and your talent, that generosity is transformational in your own life, and you become more the person that you might aspire to be and less the person that you were coming in.
Hence the purposefulness of that. You said something that made me think that we might have this intention of being this certain person, but without actually spending your money and your time pursuing that, it's just not going to happen, right?
It's just not going to happen.
It's a dream, or it's just a nice intellectual assent to something that is virtuous.
The book is really about introducing people to this concept and planting the seed that wherever you are in life, however old you are, whatever circumstances you're in, whether you have money or don't have money, whether you're under stress or whether you're relatively comfortable, there are opportunities to be generous and to benefit from receiving generosity, because every gift has both a giver and a receiver. And one of the things that it behooves us to do in life is to become better at both, become better givers and better receivers. Sometimes it's hard to receive. But we're sitting here at City of Refuge to make this a little less abstract. I showed up 20 years ago, as you said. I had a friend introduce me to the program. It was brand new. This was all empty, decrepit warehouse space at the time. I had this sense, this is an opportunity to do something that's worthwhile, so I was drawn to that. Superficially, I had some volunteer time, and I was interested, and I'd had a background in nonprofit fundraising, as I mentioned, and they needed help raising money to build out this amazing campus. And so it all lined up and made sense. But what I've realized in hindsight is that was the beginning of a transformational journey in my life. And the old saying that to give is better than to receive, the truth of that is the transformation that takes place for you. So there's a framework early on in the book. We talk about that generosity is one of the few human activities and experiences that's beneficial for everyone involved. Giving is transformational to the person giving. It's transformational to the person receiving. It's transformational to the people around them, and it's transformational to the world at large. Now, I qualify that by saying if the giving is done wisely and well, because there's a lot of giving that's wasted and it's selfish and it's poorly received. It doesn't achieve its potential. But for me, being part of this organization for 20 years has been transformational to me. I have been exposed to experiences. I've seen miracles happen and have witnessed the evolution of this incredible program in a way that has made me different in lots of amazing and wonderful ways.
And logically speaking, that doesn't make sense, which is the generosity paradox that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it's so true, right? Like, it just doesn't make sense.
It just doesn't make sense.
From a logical, physical world. Like, it can only be one way. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's generosity is a paradox. If you think about, at its essence, it's giving something up. that matters to you.
Right.
And that could be money, it could be time, it could be attention, it could be emotion. There's 5 different types of generosity that we talk about. Money is the first and the least important, possessional generosity. And then there's personal generosity, which is time and talent.
Okay.
It's really the essence of who you are. And then there's social generosity, which is everything from hospitality and manners to civic duty. It's being involved in the community, in a community in some meaningful way, and being generous in your actions and in your attitude towards others. Then there's emotional generosity, which starts to get really close to home.
Yeah.
How do you behave around others, particularly those that are close to you? And ultimately that leads to relational generosity, which is really a combination of all the other elements. So in all those different dimensions, being generous is a paradox. And this is not an original observation to me. There's a great book on this topic by a couple of professors from Notre Dame called The Paradox of Generosity,
Okay. All right.
which makes the observation that logically giving something of value away should make you less. It should mean that you have less of something.
Right.
And in fact, the opposite is true. Giving something away creates more for you, and it creates more for others. And interestingly, this is an observation that is fairly well established. Adam Smith, who many of the listeners may recognize as the founder of modern economics, The Invisible Hand and Wealth of Nations and all of that.
Yeah.
While he was busy inventing economics, he was actually, his real job was a professor of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow.
Okay.
And the first book he wrote was called Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is a lot thinner than Wealth of Nations, which could crack a coffee table. He opens the book by talking about why people behave morally, why people do good. And his thesis is people do good because human beings have imagination, and we can imagine other people's circumstances, and we feel an emotional connection to that. And if they're suffering, we want to help them.
Right.
And it's just how we're wired, which is an interesting observation, again, from an economist. He had, I think, a good sense of who people are. So all of this is very abstract, I know, and many of the listeners may be thinking, well, this is maybe not what I signed up for, theories of life, the universe, and everything. But
and I mentioned this earlier. I had a question last night, and then it showed up on your website. But, logically, to take that to the extreme, can you be too generous?
Yeah. And I think you referenced...
I want to test the limits on that.
I want to test the limits on that. You said before, a lot of people say... Well, generosity, just use money as an example. Well, but I'm in a position right now with my career and my family, and I've got all these expenses and do other stuff. Sure, I want to do some good in the world. I know there's other people out there that's hurting. I'm going to get around to that eventually.
Right.
And what that misses out on is the transformational benefits of generosity to you in the here and now. It changes your life in a meaningful way. The most acute example of that in my professional life is that of someone who sells a company. If you imagine an entrepreneur who's worked hard their whole lives to build up a business, and that business has become successful, and the sacrifices that they've made for that, and the feeling of accomplishment and pride they have at having built that company. Well, there will come a time when that company transitions to someone else. Maybe it's a family member. More often, it's a sale to an outside party.
Right.
Oftentimes, that event is the worst moment in that person's life because their identity, and they don't realize it at the time, but their whole identity was caught up in that business.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the next day, they are not that person anymore, and there's nothing to replace it. And 76% of business orders, according to the Exit Planning Institute, I was working on a presentation about this the other day, so the stat is fresh in mind, say that they profoundly regret. After 1 year, they profoundly regret having sold their company. 76%.
Wow.
And it's because of all those factors. So where am I going with this? The antidote for that, and this is just representing the way generosity works in our lives, is to have another calling or purpose that you are committed to. And ideally, it's one that is more than just self-directed and self-interested. Because you can sell that company, buy a fancy car and a boat, play a lot of golf, travel, do things that you were fantasizing about when you were working 80 hours a week. And after 6 or 12 or 15 months, that all wears out.
Right. Sure.
And it gets pretty unfulfilling. And so there's just something about us, going back to Adam Smith, that benefits from being involved and engaged in the welfare of others.
You know, that strikes home with me because several years ago, I had my own business, was doing pretty well, but I was completely stressed out. And then I remember, the relief of finding a buyer, sold it, and then the next day, when the new owners stepped in and said, "We'll take it from here. You're no longer whatever, the guy," right? Mm-hmm. Like I wasn't even sure why I was in the room. Like I just felt like an alien sitting in the room, even though I knew everybody and I helped build it. It's like, well, okay, I guess I'll just take my ball and leave, and that's about the value that I felt.
I've talked to clients who are successful leaders of companies, CEOs and such, and they retire, and there's this void in their lives that they struggle to fill. And also, not only is it their identity, but it's also the source of a lot of their relationships. Some of which were frankly superficial, because people wanted to know them because they were important and influential. And when they've passed out of that role, it turns out a lot of those friends disappear. People aren't calling you the same way they used to.
That's right.
So, how does this all relate to generosity? It reflects that paradox. And the reality of our human nature is that we are wired to be generous. And if we don't exercise that impulse, we lose. The people around us are worse off. And there's just something missing in our lives. And that's just an epidemic in our society. We have anxiety and depression and this sense of purposelessness that's an epidemic. You just see all the statistics about it. And it starts in youth. And generosity is the antidote to all of that.
That's great. That's great. So that reminds me of when you talk about the generosity journey.
Right.
We talked a little bit about that, and that was both personal and it sounds like a philosophy of generosity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so generosity is natural, but it's not normal.
Right.
It's something that we're wired for, but people don't always do it. And it's easy to understand why. You're not generous at times, even if you want to be. I'm not generous at times, even if I want to be. You wake up, you're cross with your wife, or you say something unkind to your kids, and you think, oh, why would I do that? I mean, we're just all that way, right? We're flawed, imperfect.
I'm really not familiar with
human beings. Oh, you're not?
Well,
okay, yes.
This
doesn't ring a bell at all? Okay. So never mind. My apologies. I'm certainly that way. And so our impulses are not always generous. It takes conscious effort to override those. And in the chapter in the book about emotional generosity, it's based on work that was done by a pioneering psychologist. And he identified 8 primary emotions. They're like anger and joy. And these are all, again, part of our everyday, they're part of our human experience. Yeah. And the emotions themselves can be good or bad. Anger is not always bad. It's right to be angry about some things, but are you channeling that anger in a productive way? Are you angry for the right reason, in the right way, at the right time? Or are you just ticked off because you didn't get your way at something? So there are generous and ungenerous ways of expressing emotion, for instance.
Sure.
And it's your reflex, more often than not, is the ungenerous one. Again, that's just human nature. Someone cuts you off in traffic. You really wish that you could do whatever you want to do it to them in that moment.
Sure.
But what good does that do? Right? That just raises your blood pressure, causes you harmful physical and emotional reaction. Sure. There's a great definition of anger that says it's like taking poison and expecting the other person to suffer.
Right. Yeah, I love that.
It doesn't do any good at all, unless it's properly directed. So what's a generous response versus an ungenerous response? And that's like any other healthy activity. It takes effort. It takes training. It takes discipline. It takes a conscious resolve to be more generous.
Yep.
And that's, again, in any age and any stage of life. I think there's a misperception in our society, which is something I very much hope to help reverse, that generosity is financial, for starters, and it's the province exclusively of the rich and powerful. Bill Gates is generous because he can afford to be.
Right.
Whereas I'm struggling and I don't have this and I don't have that. One of the chapters in the book that talks about personal generosity, again, time and talent, actually talks about work. Which again is not the area where you'd most think, well, oh yeah, that's generous at my job, generous in my office, etc. Work is a theater in which generosity is or isn't present in almost any interaction that we have.
Right.
With your employees, with your boss, with your clients or customers. Are you behaving generously or not? Are they behaving generously or not?
Right after our conversation when we were preparing for this, that next Sunday I went to church, and our pastor said, generosity is the outworking of authentic love. So Jeff Norris, our pastor. And I'm like, wow, that just kind of nailed it.
Isn't that
I'm like,
great?
okay, I think I got the right guy on the podcast in a few weeks. So,
well, Martin Luther King Jr. famously said in one of the most profound presentations I've ever seen, it was a sermon, and it was called Loving Your Enemies, which is another teaching of Jesus from the same lesson. That was the one we referenced earlier. He said essentially the same thing, that love is not sentimental. It's not just this sense of goodwill. It's not intangible. It's very tangible. It's active goodwill expressed towards other people.
Let's talk about the workplace. What would that look like in the workplace? What could it look like in the workplace?
So there's all these different elements. First, we talk about purpose. Is there a purpose to your job that you feel and that helps to drive your experience in the workplace? If the answer is no, you're going to have a pretty unfulfilling and miserable time at work. The example in the book was an interesting one. It was from a study I came across. It was about zookeepers. Zookeeping is a very demanding job that pays very little. But zookeepers have an extraordinarily high satisfaction level with their work because they feel they're doing something that serves a calling or a higher purpose. Now, when I think zookeeping, I think elephant dung, right? That doesn't sound all that great. But zookeepers talk about how wonderful it is to be part of this work and the animals that they work with. And they work long hours for little money, but they love it. So that says a lot, I think, to us about purpose and calling and the importance of them in the workplace. And then just all the different ways in which we can be generous or ungenerous to each other. There's another story in the book about a woman who had passed away and who was beloved in the workplace. She was a mentor and a friend, always had time for other people. She was a mid-level person in the company, had an important job, but not an extraordinary one. But when she died, there was this outpouring of grief and love. Her boss spoke at her funeral about what an incredible person she was and how invaluable she was to the company. People in other departments and other divisions that weren't there in other parts of the country had a conference call. This was back in the day, obviously. Would have been a virtual thing now, but they had a conference call to celebrate her because they all had this sense of loss that they wanted to share. And wouldn't we all love to work with people like that, have people like that work for us or work for people like that? Again, the essence of generosity is reflected in all these different aspects of life. And there's a couple other stories about people that have had extraordinary careers that were ultimately based on a sense of generosity towards the community that they lived in or some other area. So it's very much woven into every area of human experience.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your book.
It's called Wise Generosity.
And it's not just being wise. Wise stands for something.
Thank you for the prompt. WISE is an acronym, and it stands for well-grounded, inspired, satisfying, and effective. Well-grounded, inspired, satisfying, and effective. So the idea that giving achieves its full potential only when it's wise, you dig a layer deeper, and that acronym expresses the reality of purposeful, productive generosity. There's an internal dimension to it and an external dimension to it. So good giving should be inspired and satisfying. It should be motivated by a positive impulse to do good in some way. And ultimately, that should reflect back to the giver. It should be satisfying. You should feel good about that. And good giving, wise giving, has those two qualities to it.
So, but it's all in the, how do you accomplish that? Like, for example, well-grounded. What does that mean? How should it be well-grounded?
That's a great question. So the well-grounded and effective represent the external dimension.
Okay.
So when you're giving, there's an internal side, your motivation and your experience as the giver. The external part of it is who is getting the gift, and are you considering the resources that you have available and the needs of the recipient well grounded, and then what are you doing to help make sure that that gift is well used in the way that you intend, that it's effective. And so you even think of think of a Christmas present. If you get a fruitcake from your beloved Aunt Edna, there was a lot of heart behind it maybe, but you hate fruitcake.
Not effective.
And so it may be inspired to her, and she may even be satisfied in having sent it, but you didn't like fruitcake. She didn't bother asking whether you did or not, and it's going to get tossed. So it wasn't well grounded or effective. And poor Aunt Edna.
That's really good.
But that's the reality. So the definition of generosity that's offered is a considerate attitude plus caring action.
So the inspired part, are there some parameters around that, or can be inspired anyway?
I think the inspiration comes from that sense of purpose. What is it that you really care about and want to accomplish? And as we talked about earlier, for me, and this was a conscious realization that only came recently, but I was reflecting on all these different activities that I was engaged in, and realizing that many of them had a common denominator: removing barriers to opportunity, giving people who have otherwise been denied one a chance to thrive in life. And so once I became aware of that, it became easier to be more conscious about the activities that I was doing, because they were going to align more with that underlying purpose.
Well, it sounds like the book is, and I haven't read it yet, and thank you for the copy.
Absolutely.
But it sounds like it's not only encouraging about being generous, but it also gives you a practical framework to execute on that generosity that maybe you just kind of figured out by reading the book.
That's right.
This makes sense. I should be doing this, and now I know why I should be doing. Now that gives me tools or a practical way to address it.
That's right. And we're looking at different ages and stages of life. You're likely to approach generosity in different ways. Different backgrounds and experiences. Again, all of us have the capacity to be generous in ways that are beneficial to us and everyone around us. But the book is really a calling card. It's an introduction to a way of life. The underlying belief is that generosity is an essential virtue of a life well lived, and that we're all better off if we're more generous and if the people around us are more generous. But the practical sides of it are important. I'm a practitioner, and I'm an idealist, and a self-proclaimed philosopher, lover of wisdom, by the way, is what that word means. I'm also a practitioner, so there's a pragmatic aspect to this. All the good intentions in the world don't matter unless there are good actions that go along with them. And so with the wise generosity frameworks and references that are mentioned in the book, with a lot of great stories and anecdotes to back it up, the hero of the story, sort of the at the high point of the book towards the end, is the story of City of Refuge, where we're sitting, because Bruce and Rhonda Deal, who founded this organization, are the greatest and most powerful examples of generosity that I've ever seen in my life. And they've been an inspiration to me and to many other people. But with all of that as a framework, which we call the wise giving process. And that's something that reflects more about my day job. It's a way of understanding answers to two basic questions about giving, financial giving, which are: how much should I give? And then why and where should I give? And a lot of giving doesn't happen or doesn't achieve its full potential because people don't ask those questions. They're not encouraged to ask those questions. And so we've invented assessments and tools that get to the heart of those quantitative and qualitative questions. And so that's not stuff that's in the book per se, but there's some elements of that on our website, wisegenerosity.com. But there's more behind that. So if people are interested, they should reach out to us, and we'll be happy to share more.
So who's the book written to? Is it individuals? Is it corporations? Is it advisors? And who's it for?
It's a general audience of people who are just curious about this topic, for starters. But I think most often the book is ending up in the hands of people who are or are interested in being generous. And that could be for spiritual reasons because of their faith journey. It could be because they're connected to a cause or an organization that they're wanting to support maybe more meaningfully and effectively than they have in the past. It could be because they're at a stage of life where they're thinking, gosh, I've accumulated a lot of stuff. I'm not going to spend it all. I don't think I want all of it to go to my kids. There's got to be someplace else it goes. Maybe I need to give some away.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times the book is ending up in the hands of people because it's coming from a nonprofit fundraiser who wants to introduce a conversation about purposeful, practical giving, or it's coming from a professional advisor who would say, I know you're at this point where you're thinking some of these. Yeah, here's something I've come across, I think, that sets up a conversation about giving in a really good way.
What was the inspiration for writing the book? Because listen, writing a book is not just like walking around the block. It's an investment of time, energy, heart, and soul for I don't know how long it took you to do this. Years, right? So and I don't perceive it as being just a marketing tool for Chris's financial advisory services. What got you to kind of over that hump to write a book?
It's a good question. I'd had a sense at some point, the longer story behind it, that I was going to write a book at some stage. And I didn't know what it was going to be or when or even why. But that was back all the way in my student days. I liked writing and I liked research. And when I ended up not being an academic, which was one of the career paths not taken, I was like, at some point I'm going to end up writing something. In that point in life where I was asking those big questions and trying to figure out what the answers were, those 4 pillars that I described before, faith, family and friends, work, and service, reflecting on the fact that those weren't as aligned as purposefully in my life as I wanted them to be. So I was coming up with things, what could I be doing that would draw those different forces together in a more concrete way. And so I started doing some things like pro bono work, drawing on my experience as a fundraiser and as an advisor. And coming back from one of those assignments in Orlando, where I was working with Boys and Girls Clubs, helping them develop a fundraising program for business owners. I was driving up I-75. I was listening to a sermon about giving. I listen to podcasts and sermons and books on tape and things when I'm on a long car drive. And it was a light bulb moment. It just went off and I said, that's it. Generosity is what you're supposed to be focused on. And it was this flood of emotion and memory. It was like a dam had broken and a rest area came up on the highway and I pulled off and I started writing things down on the legal pad that was in my briefcase next to me. Page after page of stuff just started flowing out of my head.
Wow.
And so it was like that a moment where where supposedly if your life flashes before your eyes. I thought about all these incredible people that had been generous to me and all these institutions and organizations that I'd been a part of and all the people that had sacrificed time and money to build those that I was the beneficiary of. Going my schools and organizations all the way back to the nonprofit hospital where I was born in New York City. And it just was the sense that this is this thread that weaves not only through my life, but through everyone's life. And that should be something that people are more conscious of and more aware of. And that was the motivation for the book.
Yeah, because none of that happens without generosity.
None of that happens without generosity. And wise generosity, well-grounded, inspired, satisfying, and effective.
Yeah. Wow. All right, we can go on a long time. But I do want to ask, tell me about your career today, and is there another chapter?
Yes.
Kind of, what does that look like?
I'll be honest. It's like your life is written in chapters. And this it's now 11-year journey that started in that. And I remember the date because I went back and looked it up. It was March 28th, 2013. That was a pivotal point in my life. And this calling, if you will, that happened then started down this path. And I had a moment the week before the book came out. A lot of amazing, wonderful people that have made this happen. It is not a one-man operation by any means. But we were talking about the book launch, and we had a reception coming up to thank some of our friends and supporters, and a lot of things were going on that week. And I was on this conference call with a sense of sadness, which I didn't expect. And I was wondering where that was coming from, and I was reflecting on it. Kind of just feeling a little out of sorts. And I realized that it was because there was a chapter ending, and I was viewing it like a loss, like something's going away. This has been an important part of my life. And on that call, unbeknownst to her, one of the people on the team said, and isn't this exciting that this is the launch of this whole new chapter for you? And I was like, that's what I needed to hear, because something was ending, but something better was beginning. The whole point of writing the book was to have a message to get out into the world and a platform from which to proclaim this universally beneficial human quality of generosity. And so since then, all kinds of amazing and incredible things are happening. This opportunity to talk with you today, Bruce, and to visit with your audience, either speaking and being in front of different audiences of everyone from school kids to retired executives running the gamut, but even more that platform that I referenced, of a set of tools and resources about helping to make giving more powerful and more universal is getting traction.
And this is a little bit off topic, and I haven't put a label on this yet, but what you're describing in the next chapter after writing your book, and how opportunities open up, right? Things that you didn't plan on, and you didn't expect, or really couldn't foresee. Same thing with this podcast. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I just wanted to start it, and I did it, and, we're still doing it. But all these different relationships and opportunities and people reaching out to me and me reaching out to people that I wouldn't normally reach out to have just made just life more interesting, So, my work is going fine, and I'm not doing it for my work. I'm doing it just because, I just thought it'd be fun to do it first, and then all of a sudden all this opens up. So I don't know what to call that, but I think there's something there where if you just take a step, right? Take a step where maybe God's leading you, or where you see maybe an opportunity, just do it.
Yep.
And let's just see what happens, right? Instead of completely architecting, I don't know what's behind that door, so I'm just not going to open it. We'll have to figure out what we can call that, and then we'll write a book about it.
That sounds great. And you're getting back to that paradox that we referenced earlier. I think most people misunderstand the sequence of satisfaction in life. They view something like generosity as an output to get to at some point in the future. But in the meantime, I've got things I need to do to build to that. So I can afford to be generous when I'm successful. What people don't realize is successful people are generous. If you lead with the generosity, opportunity happens. And whatever your spiritual or philosophical inclination, it's pretty clear to me that there are forces at work in the world that reward purposeful, generous behavior. And that activity, as you said, has had that same experience. Things are happening. There's an energy behind my life now that wasn't there before, that people are drawn to. And things are happening that I didn't anticipate, and frankly are way more and better than I ever could have imagined or planned. But part of it is aligning, is once I really discovered what my purpose was, and based everything else I was doing on that foundation, everything else fell into place. Without that, you're just spinning your wheels.
Great.
And so, it's not that every day is perfect, but just the sense of authentic engagement and satisfaction that comes along with really feeling like you're doing what you were meant to do. And that's something that certainly holds over into the work and career world. Now, and again, I'm not unrealistic. There are plenty of people who work to live rather than live to work. But whatever job you're in, whatever role you have, if you can find the purpose in it and attach yourself to that, you're much better off than if you're just going through the motions, punching the clock, and wishing you weren't there.
So let's circle right back to the beginning.
All right.
About City of Refuge, your generous involvement in City of Refuge, and talk about some of the numbers where you started and where we are today. Like maybe number of people served, the number of people that the meals that were served. You showed us a kitchen earlier with one stove and one refrigerator, and we've moved on. So can you just kind of share some of the growth numbers based on generosity?
And that's a great question. And I've been in the nonprofit sector more than 30 years in one form or fashion. And there is, and I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to preface it by saying there is a natural emphasis on accountability and metrics when it comes to performance. What a place like City of Refuge demonstrates, and I'll just use the one metric that I had before. When we opened this campus, it was an empty warehouse. People started coming because they were desperately in need of help. We had this tiny galley kitchen that we looked at where we were serving 12,000 meals a year.
Crazy.
Which is insane. It's smaller than the kitchen in your house, I imagine, for you at home, by a long shot. It's this tiny little kitchen like you'd have in a small apartment. Well, we needed a bigger kitchen because we had a lot more people that we wanted to feed. feed. And so we built one, and that kitchen now serves over 300,000 meals a year.
Yeah, amazing.
And so there's just this incredible growth that's happening here, and all the different the school and the health clinic and the vocational training, and there's been exponential growth from going to be able to serve dozens of people to hundreds of people to thousands of people. But what's lost, I feel sometimes, and this is an unintended consequence of sort of the philanthropic industrial complex that we have in this country, this emphasis on metrics and performance, often masks the spirit that's behind that activity. And so you go to a website and you rate a charity based on metrics and what amount of money they spend on fundraising versus programs or something that are abstract that really has nothing to do with the quality of the work that they're doing and the immeasurable impact that it has. That's a personal observation, but there's a tremendous amount of good that is being done here, and it continues to grow on our campus and in other places. There are copycat cities of refuge that we're encouraging to grow in other cities.
Copy away.
That's all to the good.
Well, yeah, again, none of this happens without generosity, because this is not a for-profit organization
that's right.
Thank you for everybody who's contributing to this, not only possessionally, but I'll say them personally, socially, emotionally, and relationally.
All of those.
All those, right. All right, well, one of our last questions is our consuming career question. So do you feel like you're consuming your career, or is your career consuming you?
You asked that question at an interesting time, and that was the one thing that we'd planned ahead of time to give me some time to think about it. Coming off of this incredible 2-month period of transformation in my life and in my work and in the launch of this project, and it has been a burning the candle at both ends type environment for a while now. My wife said to me the other day, "You can't keep working at this pace." And I've felt that. Fortunately, we're coming up on a holiday weekend, and we get a chance to get away with my family and have some rest and relaxation. But there is this sense, I think, sometimes we all feel that we're being consumed by what we're doing in a way that we're not entirely in control of, and that's uncomfortable and unwelcome. You can't run in the red line forever. So I want to get back to that better sense of balance, which I've been fortunate enough to have most of the time. So this was just a season. But I was also thinking about that. So most of the time I feel like I am consuming rather than being consumed. However, part of me, as I was thinking about that, said, but back to generosity, just sort of the essence of why I'm here. You can't take your money with you. Make a point in the book that we are what we give in the end of the day. All that really matters is the impact that we have on other people by having been here. And is that a positive impact or a negative impact? And if it's a positive or negative impact, it's going to have ripple effects that we're not going to see the results of. They're going to radiate out from our lives for generations to come. I'm in the financial advisory world. It's assumed that you want an upward sloping line where you continue to have more and more and more.
Right.
But is that really wise at the end of the day? Shouldn't, at some point, we say, I've got enough. Now I want the line to start downward sloping. I want to be sharing what I have with my loved ones. I want to be sharing what I have with my community. And if I get to the end of the day, and one of my heroes is the British religious reformer John Wesley, who founded Methodism. Wesley famously said that if he died with more than a few pennies to his name, then he was a fraud and a hypocrite. And he was actually a pretty wealthy man. He was something like a combination of Billy Graham and Oprah back in the day. He published a lot of books about self-help and doing good, and he made a lot of money off of those, and he gave it all away. He was true to his word. And so I have that sense for myself. So about consuming, if I'm a flame that burns for a certain amount of time, I'd be happy if the candle is gone at the end. I've done the most good I possibly can.
Wow. That was a well thought out answer.
Wesley famously said, and this is how the book actually ends, it's called Wesley's Rule: do all the good you can in all the ways you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, for however long you can. And that's a motto that I'm trying to live by.
Thank you for that. That's great. All right. Well, we need to go into the lightning round.
All right. I'm ready.
Are you ready? All right. Okay. You loosened up. You're all stretched.
I just stretched. Yeah. You see, listeners at home, I just physically stretched.
All right. 5 questions. Here we go. Number 1. Most transformational book you've ever read in the last 10 years? Let's see.
Wow, that's a great question. The Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Bishop Desmond Tutu.
Wow, okay.
Which is a phenomenal book looking at both of their lives, and the moral of the story is generosity.
Really?
Just to give a hint.
All right, next question. Number 2, most memorable round of golf, because I know you golf.
I golf poorly. The most memorable round, had a chance to play at East Lake Golf Club here, which for your golfers in the audience is the home of the Tour Championship every year. It was Bobby Jones' home course back in the day. It's another amazing story of transformation and generosity. It's in a difficult neighborhood in Atlanta, not unlike this one, and it had fallen into disrepair. A local business leader just couldn't stand that idea and got a coalition of folks together to rehabilitate the course, and not just the course so it was better for golf again, but to transform the neighborhood around it.
The community,
and the community, and it's fantastic. So that's one of my favorite stories. I also had a great round of golf there with my father-in-law and 2 close friends, and that was a special day.
Nice. Okay, we're going to continue down the sports theme, because I know you bike. Mm-hmm. Which kind of bike race would you have the best chance of winning? Mountain biking, unicycle, or a big wheel?
Definitely not unicycle. I am not that coordinated. Given the inherent handicaps that everyone else would be having, I would say the big wheel.
Good for you.
Would be the best.
That's a classic.
Would be the best bet.
And it'd be far more entertaining as well.
And then you'd get to the end and you'd pull that handbrake again.
Do a spin out.
And do that spin out. That was awesome. I didn't have a big wheel, but my good friend and neighbor did.
Yeah.
And again, listeners of a certain age might wonder what we're talking about, but younger listeners, look it up, kids.
Google it. All right. And I know you like cooking, so which do you enjoy more, cooking a favorite meal for a loved one or loving a favorite meal?
Oh, boy. That's a great question. Again, food is about relationships as much as it is about sustenance.
That's
and so
right.
I'd say the cooking and sharing with a loved one.
That's nice. All right, last question. And I know you like music. So if you could have a musical artist perform at a private party, who would it be?
Oh, man. Current or all time?
Could be anybody.
I would say John Coltrane.
Wow.
Who is a fascinating person, lived a difficult and all too short life, but was an absolute musical genius, and a person of faith. He had a transformational experience recovering from the many addictions that he faced. And his most meaningful album is a tribute to God.
Yes, it is.
And it's really an incredible work. But I love his stuff.
Well, along with that, you'd get a backstage pass, so you could spend some time talking to him.
And he was with us for far too short a time.
Yeah.
But there's actually a story about that in Generosity, which the introduction to Wise Generosity got so long I had to take it out. And so now I have, my wife shudders to think, a sequel mostly written. So stay tuned.
All right. Chris, this has really been great. Thank you for taking the time. And the tour around City of Refuge. Can people come here and tour it, or can they?
You'd be able to reach out to Katie Monson, who is our coordinator of volunteer. There's all kinds of opportunities to come here and do good. And we've got a schedule every day of people coming to campus and engaging with our community here and doing good in the process. We've got folks that come every week. We've got corporate groups that come. It's a lot to be done here. So
this is a story that needs to be told on a broader base. All right. Well, how can somebody find you or follow you or connect with you?
That's a great question. So this has all been done under the auspices of my role as founder and president of Wise Generosity. You can find us at wisegenerosity.com. My email address there is chris@wisegenerosity.com. I would love to hear from you. If anything in here resonates, or if you're interested in finding out about more of the tools and resources that we have, I'd love to share that.
Thank you again for this time together. Really appreciate it.
Really, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Consuming Careers. If you've enjoyed the show, please click the follow button in your podcast app so you won't miss any of our future episodes. And if you have a minute, write us a review. We truly appreciate hearing from our listeners. And as always, I'm Bruce Smith, and you've been listening to Consuming Careers.